Greetings, people of the internet. We're here to talk about Tucker Carlson and some January 6th footage that just came out. So let's jump right into it. Let's watch some of the clip to start. Here you go.
These are the pictures you've seen of January 6th. They're familiar because they've been playing on a loop on every media outlet in America for the last 2 years. There's a reason for that. But it turns out there's quite a bit of video you haven't seen. And that video tells a very different story about what happened on January 6th. More than 40,000 hours of surveillance footage from in and around the Capitol have been withheld from the public. And once you see the video, you'll understand why. Taken as a whole, the video record does not support the claim that January 6th was an insurrection. In fact, it demolishes that claim. And that's exactly why the Democratic Party and its allies in the media prevented you from seeing it. By controlling the images you were allowed to view from January 6th, they controlled how the public understood that day. They could lie about what happened, and you would never know the difference. Those lies had a purpose. They created a pretext for a federal crackdown on opponents of the Uniparty in Washington.
Our office wanted to ensure that there was shock and awe, that we could charge as many people as possible.
The first thing you notice from viewing the full video record of January 6th is just how many people entered the Capitol building that day. Hundreds and hundreds of people, possibly thousands, over the course of about 2 hours. The crowd was enormous. A small percentage of them were hooligans. They committed vandalism. You've seen their pictures again and again. But the overwhelming majority weren't. They were peaceful. They were orderly and meek. These were not insurrectionists. They were sightseers. Footage from inside the Capitol overturns the story you've heard about January 6th. Protesters queue up in neat little lines. They give each other tours outside the Speaker's office. They take cheerful selfies and they smile. They're not destroying the Capitol. They obviously revere the Capitol. They're there because they believe the election was stolen from them. They believe in the system.
Okay, so let's pause there. First of all, I think you got to give Tucker credit. A lot of the people said he cherry-picked footage or whatever. He starts by showing you all the bad stuff, all the footage of, the people who committed crimes and the people who were basically, charged that day. And a lot of people were charged. A lot of people were arrested and charged with crimes from that day. And I support that. So I think what the bigger picture that he gets into here a little bit is that this was kind of stoked and used for propaganda purposes. And let's kind of explain the rationale behind that, because it's a good one. It's the real rationale. When you really look deeply into all the facts, it's obvious that this was blown out of proportion for political purposes by the Democrats. And listen, the Republicans do this kind of crap all the time. They did it with Benghazi. They did it with, Bill Clinton. You can go back years and years. But the implications of this on the Democratic side were far greater reaching. This was used by the security state to, first of all, justify increases in funding, so billions more dollars towards the security state, because look, what if this happens again? We gotta protect it. But also, it was used as a campaign tool by the Democrats, because let's face it, what have the Democrats done that they promised they would do? Nothing. I put it this way. If you vote for Republicans, you get Republican policies. If you vote for Democrats, you get Republican policies. That's how the country works. When you vote for Democrats, you get them in a nicer package where they say that they care about trans and people and LGBTQ communities and black people and everything. But you still get essentially the same thing. It's just it's much nicer. So anyway, I think one of the big points with this whole January 6th thing is it was used largely as a way to present Donald Trump again as some kind of an insurgent who wants to take down America. I was never a fan of Trump. I was never a MAGA guy or any of that. In fact, just the opposite. I voted for Hillary Clinton. But it became clear as time rolled on, especially after Trump won, he was not supposed to win. He wasn't supposed to win. And you can see when you dig into all the Russiagate stuff, why they didn't want him in there. And, you know, people that were working for Hillary Clinton's campaign, like Jake Sullivan, expected to be in the next administration. I mean, he worked for Obama. A lot of the Obama people that worked for Secretary Clinton expected to have positions in the new administration. And when Trump won, holy crap, what did they have to do but go on TV and accuse him of being Russian for 4 years? You know, it totally shook up things in a way that it wasn't supposed to. And when you look back again, it's like with Twitter, Trump was able to get around that mainstream narrative via Twitter. And that's why after he won, it became, oh, we have to shut that down. We got to get in there and make sure that doesn't happen again, right? So Trump has enemies in the Uniparty, and they don't like him. And this is evident with the January 6th stuff in the way that Liz Cheney joined up with the Democrats to be a big part of the January 6th hearings. There's no worse neocon pro-war advocate than Liz Cheney, and the Democrats are out here on her side, you know, hey, yeah, let's get Trump. Trump's terrible. That's one of the byproducts of Trump is the media circus around him, and the intense just wave of propaganda made anyone who opposes Trump into a good person. Remember that Michael Avenatti guy? Remember that dude? That bald dude who was, I mean, I'm bald, so I'm no hate towards bald people, but that guy was on TV every day for like 2 years, and then what happened to him? I'll have to look it up, but I know he ended up getting prosecuted for something, doing something crazy. He eventually went to jail for lying about something or committing some kind of crazy crime. You know, he was running some cottage anti-Trumper industry, duping all the people that, you know, were just, oh, Trump's so bad. So anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. The reality is Trump had nothing to do with January 6th. He gave an adjacent speech. And in fact, he urged caution with the people and peacefulness, and was like, hey, don't cause any trouble. You know, be civil. At every turn, he urged that. And the media, you know, of course, tried to twist his words, and they took clips of his speech where he said, our voices will be heard, or, you know, whatever, to kind of frame him as election denier and make him a third rail and keep him out of the system. And we're going to go through why, the facts behind all this, because, again, I'm not a pro-Trump person. I'm a pro-fact person. And the reality is, behind Trump is Trump became used as a cudgel to get liberals and the left to move to the right, frankly, on a lot of areas. And we'll go through all that. So the next part of the January 6th thing that's such an obvious ruse is the Democrats running these hearings around it, right? So they hired a TV producer. They hired a TV producer for these hearings to kind of shape this narrative. And why did they do that? Well, because, like I said earlier, when you vote for Republicans, you get Republicans. And when you vote for Democrats, you get Republicans. Everything Joe Biden has done has been a right-leaning policy. He hasn't done anything that he campaigned on. Outside of the one thing I will give him credit for is the Ketanji Jackson nomination. That's good. You know, black woman, putting a black woman on the court. That's awesome. And you can say whatever you want about her biases. And, you know, a lot of people complained that she was corporate, whatever, but she, you know, she's a black woman. I mean, just having that perspective alone is good. So that's the one thing I'll give Biden credit for. Outside of that, everything he's done has been right-wing. The student loan thing, they intentionally did it in a way that it would get blocked by the courts, and they knew it. The marijuana thing, they pardoned federal possession prosecutions, which is basically no one. Trump's First Step Act went further than that, so I've already talked about that. But with these congressional hearings, when they had these hearings, they locked down all this surveillance footage so they could create this narrative. And this is why what Tucker's doing now is kind of news, because they locked down all the footage they didn't want you to see, and they, hammered on the footage that they did want you to see. I'm sure the producer guy had a part in that, but the reality is anything that was counter to their narrative wasn't seen until now. And so that's why people are like, oh wow, this shaman guy being escorted through the Capitol by the police totally conflicts with the narrative that he was this raucous, interloper who ran inside and started setting fire to everything. I mean, this guy's been made out to be a terrorist, basically, just because, he looks funky too. So the appearance of it even. But the guy was military, if I remember correctly. I think he was a Marine or Navyman or something. He was in the military. So anyway, if you remember, when they did these hearings, these January 6 hearings, or everything that they used was circumstantial. So I don't know, like one of the things that sticks out to me was this woman, Cassidy Hutchinson, gave a testimony, and it just for like a week the media was stroking her like, oh, she's such a brave patriot, she's such a hero, and there were articles about how her life was threatened for testifying, and it was just completely dramatized. And then the meat of her testimony was hearsay. But everything she said was, I heard this guy say this, or this guy told me this. None of it she personally experienced. So I mean, that tells you what a complete, entertainment piece these January 6 hearings were. They were not serious. They weren't a serious investigation of what happened, or a balanced look at it. They were shock doctrine, basically. Hey, look at how shocking. Take these little clips of shocking footage and use them to justify massive increases in state funding for Capitol Police. And another thing that I like to touch on is the way that they tried to make it seem like all these people died. I think at one point Biden even said like 6 people died. No, 1 person died on January 6th as a result of the riots, I think, and that was Ashley Babbitt, which was another instance of liberals being pulled to the right, like, yeah, get her, she's a terrorist. I don't support police murder. I support due process. And if you and you do the same if you're not a hypocrite. So that's the problem. I have the biggest problem with liberals on this, supporting police murder because the person had a MAGA hat on, like she was any threat to the Capitol. And now that you see this footage, I'm sure, hopefully Tucker will get a little more into it. I'm sure he will, because that was the only person that died that day. But it's upsetting. So in addition to all this, then you have this Ray Epps guy, okay? And there is just so much evidence that federal agents worked, like I said, to create a shock doctrine type scenario, so they could use the footage as propaganda to justify ridiculous security increases. So Representative Matt Gaetz was on the Tim Pool podcast a couple weeks ago, and he talked about this. He talked about this with them. So here's a clip of him talking about whistleblowers.
Now we have congressional division, which didn't seem similar with Occupy Wall Street. We were all there together.
To elaborate on that, talk about the Fedsurrection. You talked about this a year ago, the January 6th.
Well, I mean, we already know, based on the whistleblower interviews that we've done, that there were federal agents and federal assets that were on the ground that day. And what we don't know is the extent to which any of those assets or agents increased the level of criminal acuity, coordinated with one another, or purposefully entrapped folks who were otherwise not wanting to hurt anyone or violate any law in some sort of technical violation of trespassing or crossing some barrier.
So there you go. I mean, that guy's a sitting member of Congress, and there's a reason he's being smeared as a right-wing extremist, and all the stuff they do to diminish the credibility of anyone who opposes the establishment. And I think that's the people really need to get past this whole left versus right mentality, because that's the problem. it's not left versus right. It's establishment versus non-establishment, and the established order is fighting desperately to keep this control. Even if you don't like Trump, it's clear that the political establishment didn't want him there, and when he got in, they did everything they could to sandbag him. And when he got out, they did everything they could to prevent him from getting back in again. So here's Christian Parenti talking about his article and what I thought this was a really relevant piece of tape to show.
My point is not that we should like Trump's foreign policy. My point is that Trump's foreign policy was incoherent in ways that were threatening to the establishment, and that's why I think the FBI withholds the Hunter Biden laptop. Because
and Russiagate too. And Russiagate too.
It's because the FBI doesn't like the fact that he put a privatizer, Betsy DeVos, in charge of public schools, or that he, basically started deregulating everything and gave the rich tax cuts. No, it's because he was threatening American global hegemony, and he did that because he didn't really understand it, and he didn't understand it because he couldn't follow things. I mean, every book on Trump says the same thing. There's no book that says he's a great listener, he really focuses, he's a details. No, it's like they all say the same thing, that in the middle of an important conversation, he just drifts off, so you see something on television. And
it's funny how Jimmy Dore is the best news show around right now. That clip is Aaron Mate interviewing Christian Parenti on Jimmy Dore's show, and I forgot about the Hunter Biden laptop. That's another great point, especially in relation to this, where the official narrative was, hey, that's Russian propaganda, and then over a couple of years things start to creep out and Elon buys Twitter, and all of a sudden you have the Twitter files, and bam, there it is. The whole thing was a complete sham and an intentional cover-up to keep Trump from winning again. And I mean, again, it's like, whether you like Trump or not, that should be disturbing, that the will of democracy is being usurped by people who work in Washington, D.C., or work for the FBI, or work for the CIA, or work in the State Department. Unelected spooks are making decisions. And again, it's even if you didn't vote for Trump and you don't like him, that's a bad precedent, because what if it was Bernie Sanders? Say in a miracle situation, Bernie Sanders gets the nod and the Democrats let it happen and he gets into the White House, and then all of a sudden the CIA and the FBI frame him as a Putin asset and kick him out. I mean, this is a battle that is above left versus right, above Republicans and Democrats. So you also have already people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and even Tucker calling police protests Antifa. So already you have this precedent that was set with the January 6th thing, the domestic terrorism. These people are domestic terrorists, and we need to use the full extent of the U.S. security apparatus to stop them and, put them in jail. It's going to be turned right around and used next time a black man is murdered, choked to death in the streets, and there's a protest. Every single protester and they're already doing it in Atlanta. They're already, MTG is out here calling it Antifa and, calling them communists, and it's sad that our political discourse has reduced to this tribalism. It's been reduced to this tribalism where it's red versus blue, or liberal versus conservative, or commie versus fascist. I got bad news for you. There's no commies in the Democratic Party, and there's no fascists in the Republican Party. I used to laugh at conservatives when they pointed at liberals doing similar stuff, and now I see it with my own eyes, and I can't laugh about it anymore. So we need to get outside of this headspace where there's a left and a right in America, because there isn't. It's a uniparty versus the regular people. And the last couple of years have successfully roped a lot of the people who I thought were free-thinking liberals into this goose-stepping cult of anything I don't agree with is bad, and fascism, and Trump is the worst thing that ever happened. Unfortunately, he wasn't. You know, Trump was nowhere near as bad as the media narrative and the propaganda made him out to be. And it's clear here why. Because, like Christian said, and I don't agree with Trump on a lot of stuff. Like he said, putting the privatizer, Betsy DeVos in as he did all kinds of stupid crap with it, which is Republican wet dreams, you know, massive tax cuts, put the head of Exxon in at the was he at the State Department? I don't even remember. But now Biden's just doing the same thing. Trump set the president, and then Biden put the guy from Raytheon in. So, you know, it's pretty obvious that there are no middlemen anymore. We're governed by corporations, and this kind of stuff, this January 6th type narrative stuff, is the liberals being duped, frankly. And they're all mad at Tucker Carlson. They're going to point at him like he's cherry picking the footage or whatever. You just saw it. He just showed you the footage they've been running for they're the ones cherry picking. You know, they're the ones that cherry picked the violent footage and didn't show you the guy picking up the knocked over cabinet, or the single file walking between the velvet ropes, or the cops letting him in the building. So anyway, that's my take as of right now on the January 6th footage update that Tucker's doing. But I'll be talking a lot about this because this is an important subject, and liberals especially need to have a come to Jesus on this one.